Good evening, Tansei, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Candlelight vigils for missing and murdered Indigenous women have become a common sight across the country. Yet they continue in Winnipeg as loved ones of Morgan Harris gathered to honor her. Harris is one of 4 victims identified in a homicide investigation that police say is linked to one man. As Tamara Pimentel reports, the families are still looking for closure.
I want her to be remembered as happy-go-lucky as she was. She was silly. She was fun. People loved to be around her.
Cambria Harris honors her mother Morgan Harris at a candlelight vigil in Winnipeg. Family and MMIWG advocates showed their support outside an apartment building where DNA evidence confirmed the death of the mother of 5. Harris, along with Mercedes Myron, Rebecca Contois, and another unidentified Indigenous woman, are named as victims of a series of murders in Winnipeg that date back to the spring of 2022.
This is a genocide happening to our Indigenous women. We are going missing left and right, and I'm not going to be next. My daughter's not going to be next. And it's sad. Something needs to change.
On Thursday, police announced the accused has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was initially charged with 1 count in May following the death of Rebecca Contois. Her partial remains were discovered in a garbage bin outside an apartment building. The rest were later found in a Winnipeg landfill. 3 Manitoba Grand Chiefs spoke with APTN and Global News. Kathy Merrick is Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
A lot of our young women migrate from First Nation communities to come to the urban areas and whatnot, and then they meet up with serial killers that prey on them, and then they're very vulnerable in terms of meeting people.
Northern Grand Chief Garrison Settee says the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women is collecting dust.
And it's up to the governments to take it off the shelf and sit down with us and let's work on this together. We have the solutions, but we don't have the resources. And if they want us to do the job for them, we will. But just give us the resources, we'll do it.
And Grand Chief Jerry Daniels of the Southern Chiefs organization says he wants to see the accused charged with hate crimes.
Any hate speech that is perpetuated online should be of zero tolerance by police officers, by society generally.
It isn't over for the families of Harris and Myron. The women's remains have yet to be found, though police say there was enough evidence for murder charges. Cambria Harris says she spent the last 9 months searching for her mother's body. But Winnipeg police say they will not be searching the landfill for the other 3 women and wouldn't say if they are searching elsewhere.
I don't think that's fair. I think that they should be searching because my mother deserves to come home. We deserve to have her remains, and so do the other families.
She says she won't give up the search.
I think it's sad that time and time again that we have to keep coming here to gather for sad circumstances like this when our family members go missing, and it shouldn't have to be that way. There were 4 women found, and those women had families. They were mothers, they were cousins, sisters, and they didn't deserve that. And the search isn't done yet because we're still looking. And that's not fair, and I don't think we should give up. The last person still deserves closure, and I find comfort in knowing that I still have some, but I don't at the same time, because nothing's changing.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Special Investigation Unit of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations says 4 guards at the Saskatchewan Penitentiary in Prince Albert are on administrative leave after an incident with an inmate. The FSIN says the Correctional Service of Canada placed the guards on leave after inmate Kihiu 4-star complained he was beaten in his cell on November 10th and 11th. He has since been transferred to the Stony Mountain Penitentiary near Winnipeg. Darla 4-star from the Thunderchild First Nation is Kihiu's mother. She says her son feared for his life before being transferred.
Stony Mountain Correctional is a better location for him. He's doing much better right now. Kihiu and I Don't ever want this to happen to anyone else in the system. If this helps just one person, it has been successful.
Now, APTN News reached out to the Correctional Services of Canada, but didn't hear back before airtime. Canada's toxic drug supply continues to kill thousands of people every year. While many are left wondering how to prevent more overdose deaths, some Manitobans say not all the options are being given a fair shot. APTN's Sav Jonesa has more.
So last year we had 407 people die in the province due to drug poisoning, which is unprecedented. And what we know is that this year the numbers are actually increasing.
These folks are on the front lines of the overdose epidemic in Manitoba. They're harm reductionists, and they believe giving people a safe space to consume drugs, also known as supervised consumption sites, will save lives.
They provide people with a humane space where they can use so they don't have to be rushed. They're not doing it in public spaces. That increases risks around like safety, for example, of discarding needles or discarding supplies.
But the politicians in power here don't like the idea. They fear it will lead to more drug use and crime.
We have treatment spaces, we have RAM clinics to help to stabilize you and connect you to resources so you don't have to be dependent on these drugs.
Levi Foy, Executive Director of Sunshine House, shared his views at a recent harm reduction conference in Winnipeg. He says that 3 decades of research speaks for itself.
We're bringing in this evidence and we're saying like this is an alternative. It doesn't work in competition with your beliefs and with RAM clinics or with detox or with treatment. Harm reduction support services like OPSs and SCSs typically work in conjunction with those services and get more people connected to those types of services long term.
The conference was organized by the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network. Its executive director, Shauna Ilsley, says the old ways aren't working.
So we're actually over 100 years into a war on drugs in Canada, and it has not stopped people from using substances. It has not deterred substance use, and in fact what we know is that it actually increases just the harms related to people's substance use. So it's not working.
She feels harm reduction makes an important connection.
Harm reduction really is about love. It's really about providing safe spaces that are non-judgmental for our relatives who are struggling in whatever way, whether it's substance use related or not, to be able to come together and gather and get the supports that they need without fear of being criminalized, without fear of being judged, without fear of being turned away for services.
The overdose epidemic is a growing problem for First Nations communities. Several chiefs have spoken about problematic drug use and overdose deaths on reserves in Manitoba. That's of concern to this attendee who works with youth coming off reserve to Winnipeg.
It's just important because I'm Indigenous and there's a lot of things that are involved with harm reduction and addiction and things like that that just come with being an Indigenous person. So I think it's important to educate myself on that, especially since I'm working with younger Indigenous people.
Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
All right, we need to step aside for a short break, but still ahead, after nearly 100 years, a stolen totem will return to a First Nation in British Columbia. And the Grassy Narrows Anishinaabe have been fighting clear-cut logging and mercury poisoning in their water for decades, and it's not over yet.
It could be gold, it could be uranium, or titanium for cell phones.
Welcome back. It's one of the longest running blockades against logging in the country. The Anishinaabe community of Grassy Narrows is in northwest Ontario, and 20 years ago it stood up against clear-cutting in their territory. Today they celebrated with a feast. For decades, the community has had to fight for the protection of the water and the territory. In addition to logging, they continue to deal with mercury poisoning in the Wabigoon River. Longtime community activist Patricia De Silva said the fight isn't over. They may now have to face off against the mining industry.
Could be gold, it could be uranium or titanium for cell phones. And I think close by here, they found one of the biggest veins in the world for cell phones. So like the fight goes on to protect our land and our water. And the next big fight we also have is nuclear waste disposal.
After nearly 100 years, a stolen totem will return to a First Nation in British Columbia. The Niska Nation announced a piece of their history will be returned by the National Museum of Scotland. This summer, they sent a delegation to the United Kingdom to ask for the pole back. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
The Niska Nation is celebrating a stolen memorial pole that will be returned to them following a historic decision by the National Museum of Scotland. In August, a Niska delegation traveled to the museum with the goal of having the Nish Jowk memorial pole repatriated. Yesterday, the museum's board agreed to return the memorial pole back to the nation. Nose Jowett, Dr. Amy Parent, was part of the delegation. She says justice has prevailed for their ancestors.
I felt just really relieved when I heard the news to know that justice has prevailed for our ancestors, and in particular for our great-great-grandmother, Joanna Moody, as well as our fallen warrior, Dawit, and that we have an opportunity now to bring this pole home and the living spirit of our ancestors home, back onto Niska lands.
The memorial pole belongs to House Nish Jow from the Frog clan in the Niska Nation. It was carved in the late 1800s to honor Jowett, a fallen warrior who was in line to be chief. In 1929, Canadian anthropologist Marius Barbeau stole the memorial pole from the Niska village with the permission from Indian Affairs, but without the consent of the nation. The pole has been at the National Museum of Scotland since. In a statement, the National Museum of Scotland announced they will transfer the totem pole back to the Niska. We are pleased to have reached this agreement and to be able to transfer the memorial pole to its people and to the place where its spiritual significance is most keenly understood. We hope this is not the end of the process, but the next step in a fruitful and ongoing relationship with the Niska. To reach this goal, it took 2 years of planning for the Niska, along with support from their partners. Nose Jowett says she is thankful to the Museum of Scotland for repatriating a part of their history. She hopes the return of the memorial pole inspires other Indigenous groups to seek the return of their cultural possessions all around the world.
We really do hope that that our story of repatriation is inspiring for all Indigenous peoples, and just in recognizing that the impossible can be possible in terms of the return of our cultural belongings, and that we can see the incredible need to continue this work with all museums that have imperial and colonial legacies around the world.
The Niska Nation will have to wait a little longer because their winter season and snow create transport challenges for the pole. But the process is expected to move forward next year. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
The Métis Nation of Alberta just had the largest ratification vote by an Indigenous group in Canadian history. We are joined by our web reporter Danielle Parody to tell us more about what it means for the Métis Nation. Danielle, thanks so much for joining us here today. Can you tell us a little bit about what the vote was all about?
Hi, Daryl. Yeah, the Otem Peninsula, the people who govern themselves, which is a name the Métis have claimed from themselves, given by the Cree. That's the name of the agreement that was working to establish an official language as well as 4 branches of the government, including a citizens' assembly. The Constitution also aimed to repatriate lands, resources, cultural artifacts, and sacred sites to the Métis.
Okay, and there has been some opposition within the Métis Nation of Alberta over this, right? There's some communities that are threatening legal action as well. So what does this mean for the Métis Nation of Alberta?
Yeah, of the 56,000 registered members, there's over 100,000 people who identify as Métis in Alberta, but about 56,000 members. About 15,000 voted, and there was a 97% vote in favor of the Constitution. That's what Audrey Poitras announced last night. However, 2 days ago, there were news stories about how there's 14 communities, including nations and settlements, that are speaking out and threatening legal action because they feel that the Métis Nation of Alberta is Edmonton-centric and focused on larger urban centers and might not meet the needs of their individual rural communities. So they have some concerns, and they don't feel like the consultations that have been done have answered those concerns yet. Alberta is really unique in having given land to the Métis. So unlike in Manitoba, where there's not settlements, there's specific regions and probably specific cultures that have emerged because of that.
So, Danielle, given everything you just said, what happens going forward here?
Well, there's always been some tension, you might call it beefs, within the Métis community of Alberta. And so that's obviously going to continue. We'll see if those legal threats are made good. And there's going to have to be some real consultation and working together and figuring out the best way forward for the people here, as well as, how to relate with the Métis across the nation. So how does the Métis Nation of Alberta work with Winnipeg, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a beginning, and it's a very historic beginning. It's been called the largest Indigenous ratification of an agreement. But that doesn't mean that it's not a stepping stone. There's still more to come.
We'll have to leave it there. Danielle, thanks so much for joining us and sharing some of your insight into this.
Thank you.
All right, we have to step aside one final time, but still ahead, a preview of tonight's APTN Investigates. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. This is probably something you don't see every day. It was barn moving day for a Saskatchewan farmer. This photo was sent in by Ruth Chorney. And Ruth, we hope you weren't delayed for too long along the highway. You can send your photos by email to share@aptn.ca, and it might just be our next photo of the day. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting in the east, 2 degrees in St. John's and 2 degrees in Halifax. -2 in Cartwright and -3 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -3 in Quebec City and +2 in Montreal. -4 and some flurries in North Bay and +3 in Sault Ste. Marie. -19 in Big Trout Lake and -9 in Thunder Bay. -27 in Churchill and -24 in Puckatawagan. -11 in Barons River and -17 in some snow in Winnipeg. -22 in Swift Current and -22 in Saskatoon. -20 in Clear in Meadow Lake and snow and -23 in Stony Rapids. As we move west, snow and -17 in Fort Chipewyan and clear and -12 in Peace River. Clear and -9 in Edmonton, and clear and -6 in Calgary. +5 in Vancouver, and -10 in clear in Bella Coola. -1 in clear in Prince Rupert, and -14 in Fort Nelson. -14 in some snow in Beaver Creek, and -11 in Rock River. -10 in Norman Wells, and -11 in Fort Simpson. 0 degrees and some snow in Fort McPherson, and -1 in Colville Lake. -34 in Cambridge Bay, and -25 in snow in Chesterfield. -19 in snow in Aglulic, and 0 in Iqaluit. A Supreme Court decision has granted Section 35 rights to members of the Sinixt from south of the border. But in Canada, the Sinixt were legally extinct for decades. Tonight on APTN Investigates, reporters Rob Smith and Melissa Ridgen head into the BC interior to find out what this means for both peoples. For more on the story, we are joined now by Rob Smith in Vancouver. Rob, thanks so much for joining us. This past summer, you and former APTN news anchor Melissa Ridgen went to Nelson, British Columbia. What did you guys find?
We found a celebration. It was members of the Sinixt Nation who happened to live south of the border in a place called Colville had just won a Indigenous rights case, and back in 2021. It was so they crossed the border to have a celebration. It was delayed a year because of COVID. It was interesting for us to find. Well, for lack of a better term, American tribe winning Section 35 rights here in Canada. So we went down there and to check out the celebration, but we also found a little bit of controversy.
Now, Rob, can you give us a bit of background on that Supreme Court case?
Yeah, the Sinixt in Canada were a First Nation that were declared extinct back in 1956, I believe, and the remnants of those people migrated to the United States, and they started to assert their right to a land base here in Canada around 1990. They started a land claim. This escalated to a point where one of the members, a member by the name of Rick Bazatel, crossed the Canadian border and shot an elk, and he was charged. And that court challenge wound its way all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. And like I said, that was a win for the Sinixt in 2021. They established, an American tribe established Section 35 rights here in Canada.
And Rob, in your time doing this, I'm curious, what did you make of the ongoing controversy?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we found some controversy there. There are factions within the Sinixt Nation itself, and again, for lack of a better term, it's split by the Canadian-U.S. border. The Sinixt north of the border have held an occupation site for 30 years in the Valacan area, just north of Nelson, BC, where remains and old pit houses that go back 3,500 years were disturbed when a highway was built, like I said, some 30 years ago. So they lay claim as representatives of the Sinixt in Canada. This has always been opposed by the American Sinixt, and this is kind of coming to a head now that again, for lack of a better term, the American Sinixt are looking for growing a presence here in Canada.
Well, it's certainly an interesting story, Rob. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, you can catch APTN Investigates Sinixt Nation, a story of extinction and baskets, a few minutes from now following the news. And that is all the news we have for you tonight on APTN National News. If you missed any of our stories or you want to catch up, you can head to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you for joining us. Miigwech, and have a great night.